Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners to Big Little Small Talk. You're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're out in the community interviewing someone interesting. And today, I've got someone very interesting, a man by the name of Steve Cooper, and he's the operations manager at Cobb+Co Museum here in Toowoomba. Welcome along to Big Little Small Talk, Steve.
Hi Megan, and hi to all the listeners.
Thank you for joining me today. We met several years ago when you came to get your eyes tested in my other life as an optometrist, and you had just been working up in Noosa, and I want to ask you about your career in a little minute, but you'd been working on a de-amalgamation strategy at that stage. Can you tell me about that?
Gee, that's winding back the clock some time now, and I remember the day we met too. It was very, very good, and you really were one of the first to prescribe and recognise that I needed glasses. So, touche and congrats for that. Yeah, look, that was an interesting time of my life. I was the CEO of Tourism Noosa for some 8 years. And, we went through the highs and lows of an industry, riding through drought and a dollar cycling from 68 cents to $1.20 and the impacts that has on the industry. But no one prepared us for the perfect storm that was the debate and the emotion around council amalgamation and de-amalgamation. And Noosa had a very tight-knit community, a very strong, the tourism office, a strong relationship with its council and its industry, of course. And the council basically took me offline, and the mayor at that time was a guy called Bob Abbott, and who was a Toowoomba boy, funnily enough, an electrician by trade in Toowoomba. So I was taken offline to basically work closely with council about how we could get the Noosa message to resonate and share with a broader state, and to share a message that wasn't about a gated community, but about an open, welcoming community that wanted to preserve the things that it had built over many, many years. So it started a great ride of friendships, and made a lot of lifelong friends, and I'll dare say I probably made a few enemies through that process as well. It was good. For me, it was heartwarming to see the results that came of it, and to see ultimately the introduction of a biosphere, which is, for the listeners, a UNESCO initiative that looks about a community, and they call it the Commonwealth of that community, that preserves what it's built and preserves the values, that whether it's affordable housing for families, whether it's growing organically produced safe food for the community, looking after the environment, I dare say, and of course balancing that with a very big, strong tourism industry. So I took that challenge on, and as I said, we worked through, got the wrong and right result, but in the longer term, the right result.
When you say the wrong and the right result, what do you mean by that? What was the end result? Did you de-amalgamate?
That's right, we did de-amalgamate, yes, and it was a good outcome. But it was a story that people interpreted in many different ways, and I'm not sure why. And I'm not a long-term Noosa resident. So I'm born in Casino, New South Wales, and I've gone through my career through different iterations of transport and so forth. So to ultimately end up in Noosa in that pretty important and prestigious role, and to ultimately be accepted by residents first and foremost, because tourism, as much as the residents were up in arms about the council being de-amalgamated, they were very conscious of preserving their lifestyle, and so too was the industry on the other side of that coin, determined to make sure that the industry didn't suffer as a result of that. So it was a balancing act, and I guess if there was a term called industrial diplomacy, I'd become an expert overnight.
Well, you're going to have to expand on industrial diplomacy.
Yeah, look, it's understanding and listening, I guess, at the heart of what it's all about. And through the process, I met a lot of really important people, ministers, people from all forms of the community, whether they be teachers, farmers. Their views were just as important as anyone else, and that's what we coalesced into the big picture of why Noosa should be de-amalgamated. I don't know if the listeners recall, there was a huge march in George Street there were a couple of us regions and smaller regions from west, southwest and north in Queensland that banded together, and I think there was over 38,000 people that day who voiced that opinion against amalgamation.
So famously, a lot of all the councils in Queensland were amalgamated in 2008. So what year were you de-amalgamated then, Steve?
It would, gee, as I said, I'm losing a bit of track of time here. Would it be 2013 or? Look, I'm not sure. That's the number that comes
roughly
to mind.
how long it took. Now, you said that you started your early years you spent in casino, and then did you go and study at university or?
Look, I've gone through a very interesting life. I come from a family from the land, basically through horses, and funnily enough, through horse racing. You either do very well through horse racing or you make a living out of it. My family was obviously the latter, but it was a very passionate lifestyle for my family and extended family. So in casino, you either stayed with the family initiative or, funnily enough, you joined the railway. I ended up joining the railway and moving to Sydney, and started to work through their retail area. I just had a penchant, if you like, for service and meeting people, and then most importantly trying to build business and so forth. So I did that, and over the next 6 years or so, ran the entire network of retail operations for State Rail, and ultimately that morphed into a thing called Newslink, which a lot of the listeners may recognise at airports now. So they had their upbringing and wellspring from little kiosks and news agencies in Sydney across the rail network.
I did read in your bio, Steve, that your career was interrupted for 5 years to fulfill a passion for winter skiing and business, how you marry winter skiing and business in Austria. So tell me about that.
Well, I was I love bike riding, and I was riding a bike as best I could.
Motorbikes?
Yeah, no,
push bikes.
Cycling. And surfing at that time, and just started to understand snow skiing before I left Australia. And as you do at that age, I ran out of money in my travel and found myself up in just near Kitzbühel in Innsbruck, and looking for work, and ended up meeting a chap by the name of Leonard Stock. And he kindly offered me a job, and I went back to my travelling companions who were on the way to the Canary Islands to finish the surfing part, and I said, look, I can't continue, I've got to start work tomorrow in effect, up in the mountains. And I said, a guy called Leonard Stock. They said, do you know who that is? And I said, I have no idea, but he's a lovely man. It turns out that he was the gold medalist downhill ski racer for Austria. And he invited me into his life and his family. I lived with his home for 6 years, 5 years, I should say, and was made a part of the village, a lifelong member of that village, as Skippy the silver kangaroo, and because I was learning the racing aspect myself. But in the summer, he ran a very, very important ski and sports business. And through our relationship, I could start to look after a lot of the European and American visitation to his business. And he thought, well, he'd better teach this young guy a few things about how they do business in Austria. So I ended in Vienna doing some business schooling, which ultimately became the foundation for my work with State Rail and retail management and food and beverage management and function and venue hire and passenger business as trains and so forth. So it was an interesting revolving doors moment.
How did you get on language-wise?
I learnt the hard way. Yeah, I still speak ein ganz schlechter Deutsch. I speak a Schule Deutsch, which is very bad, school type level, but and I do try and practice. And in fact, there's a wonderful group in Toowoomba who I'm going to gravitate towards over the next couple of months and try and get into. They go for dinner every second week and talk nothing but German at different restaurants around the city. Okay,
a bit of language immersion while you're having your Turkish or something.
Correct. Yeah, there you go.
Might be the way. Do you think that you're naturally an entrepreneurial sort of a person?
Look, possibly. I've always wanted to start my own business. I've never done that, but in every role that I've found myself in, it's always been at a change management time. I've been one of the key people that has been invited to work with people to talk about change and introduce a new way of thinking, but one that was, as I said earlier, industrial diplomacy. I ended up in the arbitration courts in New South Wales and Sydney so many times, representing the needs of the different authorities that I was working for. sadly contesting against the staff who took exception to a lot of the changes. But they were big entities themselves. But we fast forward 20 years, and CountryLink is a marvellous business now in its own right. And the staff of travel centres, rather than ticket office windows, are now fully fledged travel agents. So you can buy a rail ticket, rent a car, book your accommodation, fly home, all in a one single shop. So, and then went on to do that, of course, in Queensland as well.
People don't like change generally, do they? What's the secret to change management?
If you know, I'd love to know also. But look, as we spoke about empathy, honesty, ethic, I think they're the words that instantly spring to my mind. If you're a charlatan, you'll get caught out. People's radars are pretty attuned to working out if there's an agenda or the hidden agenda. And that's one thing I always put up front, that yes, I have an agenda like everyone. My agenda is to do my best for you rather than have a hidden agenda. And that type of mantra has kind of helped me and served me well for all the change managers and management issues that I've had to work through.
But generally you would say that change, an organisation wants change probably to drive efficiencies or whatever. So how do you not have it's not a hidden agenda, but there is an agenda, there's an agenda behind everything, I guess.
And if it's to be the best you can be, whether it be as an individual or as an organisational outcome, that's all we can ask. And so I've always tried to identify that as part. With CountryLink, I was one of 6 managers selected. I remember the day at Wynyard, and to form this new company and this new way of thinking about rail travel, which is more or less no more sleepers type passenger, but more like an airline on rail service, quick, fast, and point to point, and so forth. So it meant it was culturally huge for the staff to get their heads around that, and myself included. But we all bought into it, and as I said, if you do your best, hopefully only the best comes of it, if you pardon that cliche.
We don't mind a cliche. So when you had this interrupted career in Austria and you came back and were working in the rail industry still,
that's right.
you took up with the same...
Yes, State Rail were very, very happy, and I guess I was very grateful to have the opportunity to return to work for them, and then started to lead the real renovation around the business for the passenger business services, which was on board passenger business, retail distribution, sales strategies for the rail, buying a ticket not only at stations but anywhere. And when I say online back in those days was a pretty big deal. And after this, some years later, I went to the Territory, and we're still talking phones which were the size of a shoebox in those days. So this was a fairly long time ago.
Yeah. Okay. So our career, we went up to the Territory after that.
Well, from New South Wales, there was a guy called Vince O'Rourke. He was the last commissioner of Queensland Rail. Is a Queensland Museum Gold Medalist Award for his contribution to society and heritage in Queensland, and was responsible for me, in his words, come up for a 6-month secondment holiday in the sun, and let's see if we can do some clever stuff with Queensland Rail and ticketing and distribution and new products. And that 6 months turned into a lifetime of great work, great outcomes, great friendships, and great challenges too, obviously with Noosa at the back end there. But at that time too, there was a wonderful opportunity that emerged in the Northern Territory. They were looking for the same set of skills in the Department of Transport and Works, a very, very big organisation that was building airports, wharves, railways, repairing hospitals, but it was doing it in a pretty clumsy way, in a very, if you like, long-term bureaucratic governance way, and it needed reinvigoration so that it could be seen to be, one, accountable, and so when people were given a bill for service, they would be happy to pay it, as opposed to complaining about the costs, the overrun, the poor project management. So my job was to instill that and to do that over, it must have been a 5-6 year period, and I travelled the length and breadth of the Territory. Became the treasurer of the rugby union up there, which was a bit of a passion for me and still is at the time, and again made a lifetime group of friends that will be with me forever.
Where were you living when you were in the Territory?
Darwin, but there was a satellite suburb called Palmerston. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's on the way to a place called Humpty Doo, which is even further down
which
the
is
track.
on the way to Kakadu.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So living at Palmerston, and that's where the headquarters for Transport and Works was, and it was great. There's not many places where you can go to the Shell service station and see a 2 or 3 metre crocodile crossing the highway in front of you as you do that.
How long did you spend in the Territory?
Yeah, it would about 7 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So along all this way, are we getting married, having a
married.
family? What's happening in Steve's personal life at this stage?
We are married. I've met a lovely lady, just in Queensland, funnily enough, and we moved to the Northern Territory. It was her opportunity and career which was the catalyst for us ultimately leaving the Territory. She was a very clever, and I say she's retired now, marketing manager for 5- and 6-star hotels, and had done a remarkable job. And sure enough, they wanted that remarkable ability transferred to Melbourne. And I thought, well, she's been so supportive of me, and I was doing a lot of travel through the Territory, and I'd be gone for days at a time. So it was just fair to do the right thing for her career. And
Where had your wife grown up?
Yeah, so
where had she grown up?
In a place called Mildura. And Mildura, if they haven't been there in the listening audience, put it on the bucket list. It really is a sensational little place to visit. Very remote, borderline outback, but it's a green oasis in the middle of nowhere with its irrigation and history. It's fantastic. It's a story in itself. Yeah.
Okay, well, you're a good ambassador for Mildura. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB, and they're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're in Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to the current operations manager, Steve Cooper, at Cobb+Co Museums. And I can't wait to get on to talk about Cobb+Co, but we'll just do things in sequence because I do tend to jump around a little bit. We were just talking about your wife. You moved from the Northern Territory back to Melbourne because of her work for her. Had you had a family by this stage, Steve?
Look, my wife had a family. It was kind of one of those instant families for me, and it turned out to be a wonderful result. Our girls grew up with us through their early years in the Territory. I still remember the school days when they'd come and we'd say, have we made any friends today? And they'd point out, see the one in the red jumper? And the red jumper, of course, was an Aboriginal girl, and but they don't see colour as we see it. They just see beautiful things in beautiful people. And I thought, well, if that's what the Territory is doing for the kids, that's got to be a good thing. Yeah, so I take that memory and cherish that. Then we as a family moved to Melbourne, and I was fortunate enough to pick up a very, very good opportunity with working as a management consultant for the 3 governments of South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, managing the marketing of the Murray River and working with 37 councils. And it was great.
What was great about that job?
Again, we use the term industrial diplomacy. Being in local government, you're familiar with, there's a strong sentiment and there's emotional commitment to jobs and tasks that and of the 37 councils, I can tell you, everyone is emotionally charged to their objectives and representing their stakeholders, of course. But it was bringing that 37 together and the 3 governments, because South Australia always felt a little bit left out. The border between Victoria and New South Wales is where a lot of the traffic goes, so they were keen to see more paddle steaming, more tourism, more golf, etc., more wine, and have that into the broader messaging of the marketing. And we did that. And in fact, we did it very successfully. We created a Murray River Ambassador program. When I say we, it was me working from my kitchen office in North Melbourne. And but again, just the cycle and opportunity. The ambassador program had a lady by the name of Tammy Van Wisser, a strong swimmer, swam the channel multiple times, but swam the length of the Murray River from start to finish. Jimmy Little, the Aboriginal musician, of course, joined representing culture. Stuart Appleby, a golfer at that point, joined representing all the golf and sport. And a dear friend to this day, Stefano Depiri. Listeners might recall the ABC's Gondola on the Murray show. Stefano and I become lifelong friends and still are today. He comes up to Toowoomba. He raves about Toowoomba, and we can talk about that later. But so yeah, from that, it then led to an entry into the Qantas Australian Destination Marketing Awards, where the Murray River came runner-up to a little place called Noosa. And I was talking to the board of the Noosa that night and congratulating them on their win. And I said, if only we had a beach, we'd probably give you a real shake. And as time went by, a couple of weeks, I got a couple of messages and said, would you be interested in an opportunity up in Noosa? And fast forward, I had 8 years up there.
How was your wife about the idea of on the road again?
Good. Again, I had to leave early and set up and do things, and Anne had to drive and get there by herself. But we've got lots of friends, and so they become road travelling companions and buddies, and we'd make trips out of things and so forth. But when Anne arrived at Noosa, she was so happy. The businesses and industry was so welcoming. What she wasn't prepared for was the roundabouts.
Oh.
Anyone who's been to Noosa, you've got to know the roundabouts.
A plethora of roundabouts. Did Anne manage to get a job there as well?
Yes, yeah. She landed in some very prestigious jobs with Novotel and the Crown Pelican Waters down at Caloundra. And that was good because I was in Noosa, and as I said, there was a lot of emotion about Noosa being this crusty, gated, population-capped community that was, aloof to the rest of the world. Certainly there's touches of that, if I'm truthful, but by and large, it's not the case. It's a very warm, welcoming community. And so having Anne ground me further every day with Marucci, Mooloolaba and Caloundra was a good thing to understand that, the broader emotion on the coast.
Now, I'm not sure whether you did touch on it before, Steve, but you talked about the biosphere. Yeah. Now, what is the UNESCO Biosphere Deputy Chairman's role? Tell me about that.
Noosa Council, under the mayorship of Bob Abbott, worked for some years, about 4 years, travelling to Paris. The biospheres they're one step down from World Heritage. But they do allow for protection of the environment, but they give certain liberties to community doing stuff with industry, if you like. So if you do have speedboats on a river, you've got to have limits on speed to stop wake and soil erosion and so forth. So, but at the end of the day, you had a set of KPIs about the environment that had to be preserved. And at that time, you were looking, particularly in Southeast Asia, there was a lot of pristine areas in Myanmar, throughout Asia, Vietnam, that were being polluted, overdeveloped, and the UNESCO wanted these biospheres to be representative models that yes, you can have development, but you can balance that with the needs of the people who live there, and of course, most importantly and sensitively, the environment. And it's no doubt, my time on the Murray, I was invited onto the Federal Advisory Panel as the voice of tourism and industry to talk about water allocations and so still a very divisive topic today and so forth. But I started to get a sense of what the planet and what the globe, what Earth is all about, and how we are so lucky to be here, and how, as industry representatives that really benefit from the things that the Earth gives us, we've got an obligation to protect it.
Hallelujah to that, brother, I say.
Thank you. Yeah.
How did we end up in Toowoomba?
Toowoomba. Now, I was doing some consulting work after I finished with Noosa and Destination, Sunshine Coast. And there was an opportunity with Qld Museum, and I always gravitate towards organisations that have real meaning, a brand that resonates with integrity, something that is meaningful, whether it's the UNESCO, whether it was brand Noosa at another level. But Qld Museum fascinated me. And again, with an opportunity with my community, and I'd worked on a lot of advisory boards and panels and committees through this entire journey. I like to get involved with community as best I can, so I can contribute to that, if you like, the protective elements of what community should do. Cobb+Co had emerged as that they were looking for an experienced and operations manager, and it just read perfect. And why it was even more perfect is because my mother lives here, and obviously, I'm not sure of the listeners' audience age and demographic there, but
varied, Steve, very varied.
Varied, that's good. Well, I've got no secret. I've just turned 60. I'm a little over 60. So my mum is at a stage where it's very important to look after her, and the same with my wife's mum. So we moved my wife's mother to Toowoomba, and who unfortunately passed several weeks ago, but I still have my mum, and she's the last of our entire family. So this is a chance in life to do a very rewarding job and work in a great community, but also spend very important time with my family.
What brought your mother to Toowoomba?
I think her sister, and funnily enough, I think the horses had something to do with it, somewhere in the grander scheme of things. But no, she lives up at close to Clifford Park, and a lovely little complex there that's close to shopping centres and so forth. And I think as she was becoming aware, age, none of us are getting any younger, so we've got to do the right things about proximity to shopping and health facility. And it goes without saying, Toowoomba's reputation as an educational and health capital, if you like, of regional Australia is not questioned. So that was a big thing for us to do it.
It sounds like it's worked out beautifully.
It has.
Okay, we're meeting here in your boardroom at the beautiful Qd Museum, which is looking out to a beautiful courtyard out there. And I was here just a few days ago, and you had the Take Another Look, Captain Cook. I want to talk about some of the events that you have here, but can you tell me about the history of the Qd Museum? How did it come into existence?
Well, we're talking about community and success being, community being part of any wellspring of success. Well, if ever there was an example of that, our community should be so proud and loud about the Qd Museum. There's a guy called Bolton who was one of the most, I guess colourful would be the term used nowadays in circles of discussion, whether it's of business and law and so forth. But Bill Bolton had the best collection of carriages, certainly in Queensland, if not Australia. He also was a mad collector of art and books. And for the listeners, if you don't get to Cobb+Co, you've got to get to the Region's Art Gallery, because Bill Bolton donated his coaches to the Queensland Museum, and we'll talk about that shortly, but his entire library collection and art collection, which is unsurpassed, to the Toowoomba Regional Art Gallery. So visitors to community and visitors get a really unique opportunity to experience what his legacy was. So how did those carriages end up at Cobb+Co? Back in the day, the show ring, which is now the TAFE Oval, for your listeners who might be familiar with the TAFE precinct, it was the Toowoomba Showground. And around the showground there was all the pavilions, and the last remaining pavilion, which is still there, was the agricultural pavilion. It was, funnily enough, the only space that was a covered shed that was big enough where they could, there was a fire at Bill Bolton's collection area. Townsfolk community ran to the scene, cut gates, pushed fences down and dragged all the carriages out. They needed a home pretty quick, and the only home that they could find and in that time frame was the agricultural pavilion. And so anyone visiting the museum will see, I guess, a step back in time. When you walk from one facet of the museum to the other, you're walking from what is a very old pavilion into the southern area of the museum, which is very much state-of-the-art, architecturally designed. But so to this day, since 1964, those carriages have been here, and at this moment we're now going through a refreshment of how we can reimagine and represent those.
Okay. Are we allowed to have an insight into what might be the new look?
Well, we've got to take learnings from it. Marketing now is changed from, I grew up in an era, funnily enough, of a guy called Kotler. He was the guru of marketing and so forth. It was all about product, price, place, promotion, standard things in business and so forth. But as we've evolved now into this digital economy, what is important is experience and advocacy of those people, so that they can talk about a great experience, tell other people about it socially. But if you can go the next step and personalise it so that they get a tailored experience. So how can we do that in a museum? And it's quite simple, really. You then can have bespoke tours created to meet demand. Some people may want to know only about rubbish collection, believe it or not, or certain type of buggies, so we can now tailor. If they want to travel around the bus or come to the museum, we can put a curator onto the plane or the bus, so that whole immersive experience starts from the get-go. So we've got to start thinking like that into the future. And then, of course, there's the presentation of the collection, and our curatorial area are working very hard on that at the moment, reimagining in this digital world what that could be, whether it's lifting, height and tilt and lights, holograms, I dare say, and so forth. So it's going to be a very exciting time over the next few years, and a challenging time, because through this period the museum has had a renaissance in visitation. Since 2015, we were hovering around 75,000, 80,000 people, visitors a year. That's now, just for pre-COVID, around 140,000. It's fantastic, and on that it's still, and we took a hit like everyone through the pandemic. We saw numbers drop down to 90, which is still reasonably pretty good. Toowoomba itself weathered the pandemic reasonably well. But now, we're on the way back to 120,000 this year, and hopefully that'll be 140, 150, and to become a true icon and representative business of Toowoomba. And of course we talk about the heritage and bold ambition statements and rich tradition. Well, hopefully we can start to embody that a bit more.
Brilliant. Just remind the listeners that they're on 40DB. We're in Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking to Steve Cooper from Cobb+Co Museums. Steve, you talked about the Bolton collection coming here. In 2010, you had a big renovation, a big restoration. I think it was an $8 million restoration. You weren't here then, were you? No. But I believe that the community raised $2 million. Is that correct? Absolutely.
A lot of people ask, why is Cobb+Co different? And the answer, we keep going back to this word community. I had no plan for this in this conversation, but it's been very evident to me that if you tap into the community, you tap into an opportunity. And community will support. We work with a community board called the Friends of Cobb+Co. It's under the chairmanship of a guy called Dennis Campbell, who this year was recognised for his 20-year service with a Queensland Museum medal. Previous recipients of that, of course, were David Attenborough, Steve Irwin. So Dennis, a local Toowoomba guy, is in the best of company in terms of preserving and recognising heritage and community. So Dennis was working with that board, and they raised money. Now, Mary Wagner in this day was sitting in that community board, and she identified that she might, if we, excluding myself, I wasn't here those days, if they could get a certain amount, she would go and represent that to her friend in government, the Premier, Bligh, at that point, and look at a dollar for dollar arrangement. So that 8 turned to 16, and then that 16 turned to 32 with the federal government on top of that. And that has now resulted in the great facility that it is. And I dare say the new challenge, because we're actively involved in discussions to now expand the museum so that we can bring true world-class exhibitions, and I mean world-class, to Toowoomba for the benefit of the community, but still recognising and preserving all of the heritage, all of the craft, all of the trades. So the museum will look different in the future, and that's the work that's being done right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating story. And I'll tell you what else is fascinating when I went to have a look at what's on, because I started to say to the listeners that I was here for a schools program the other day called Take Another Look, Captain Cook. So we might start with that one. What is that about?
It's all about a shared safe space for people to come and have debates and discussions, but to do it without fear, and to do it, as I said, in safety. And that is at the very heart of what a museum should be. We can talk about the past, we can talk about the future, and so forth. So NAIDOC Week is an opportunity for us to share about First Nations people and their role, their custodianship of the lands. And so what the museum has done, again, with that notion of a safe space to discuss, is bring in the opportunity to say, well, if Captain Cook could wind the clock back 250, 270 years, what would Captain Cook do if he knew about this nation of people, their range of languages, their skills, their crafts, their preservation of land, and would he have done and treated and acted the same way? So we have those discussions, but we do it with children and kids from prep through to, I guess, up to about 10 or 11 years old. I can say, as an immersive experience, I watch it every morning this week, and to see the kids get involved in the dance, wanting to learn to do native dance and enjoying themselves, it's just one of the best heartwarming experiences you could ask for.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the programs that you have on. Tell me about the spy espionage in Australia.
Yeah, we've because the museum's built about, as we said, experience, and that experience is the first and foremost is, of course, the story of the collection, the carriages. But then to supplement that, we have touring exhibition strategies. So our Janelle Inslee, who works in our exhibitions area, sources Australia nationally for opportunities to bring interesting touring exhibitions. So this is all about espionage and spy in the ASIO era, the 1950s, Harold Holt, if you like, and so forth. So it's very niche orientated, but again, it's then supports what we call our programming, and in that programming and experience, we then have workshops. So not only do we craft and heritage wagon wheels and woodwork and blacksmithing, there will be work with kids about decoding messages and understanding coding itself. So the workshop, so there's learning outcomes for all of that. And then we get into pretty special territory with an initiative we did about 8-9 months ago, we called the Toowoomba Footprint. And it was a challenge that the cultural sector within the city of Toowoomba come together, the Empire Theatre, Regional Art Gallery, our libraries, our regional arts sector networking organisation, the Toowoomba Arts Council, and said, why can't we do stuff together? And and it brought back the opportunity and memories for me. I always used to marvel as a young tourism manager, why Cairns always was the best in Australia? Why North Queensland always got all the accolade? And the answer was because they worked together. If you went and said, I want to go on the Kuranda Rail, and then I want to go on a boat trip to Lower, that same person would sell both just as passionately as what they would do there. So, and that's where I say our sector's coming together. We're now in 2 years of that. And I've got to say, working with the tourism body locally now, I've never had a better relationship with the industry sector than what we've got here, because we know we've got to cross-sell, we've got to work together and promote one another. And that's where I think we're heading. So it's a pretty good story.
Yeah. A rising tide floats all boats.
Oh, yes.
I tell you what I found really fascinating was this series of lectures that you have. What are they called? The curators discussions, conversations. Tell me about, and I've missed it because I think it was last night, about the from gypsy tap to twist, rock and roll in Toowoomba from the beginning. Well, what was that about? Chapter
3. Now, we're talking about a group of gentlemen in the late 50s who were very strong musical identities in their own right. This is before electric guitars, so there was cello, there was bass, but there was everything for the big dance and type music, but it was morphing at that time into the early 60s with electrification of music. These guys, Chapter 3, were at the forefront, and they're Toowoomba guys. They are fantastic. In fact, we only got halfway through their story for yesterday's discussion, and now we're going to have part 2. They morphed into a band called the Defenders in Brisbane, and they were doing backups for the Bee Gees and Toowoomba guys. Doing their lead guitarist become their default accidental singer because no one else wanted or could sing. And
a great story. So, Steve, these curator conversations, they're on how often?
Yeah, they're every month on the second Tuesday.
Okay.
And we cover, as I said, that safe discussion mantra. We investigate and explore all sorts of topics, from pirates to hidden treasures to anecdotal myths to ghost stories. It's Jeff Powell, who is our curator, of course, oversees all of that and is always on the lookout for great stories to share. And we've now started digitally recording, because these are the stories in 50 years' time that we need to preserve for the next generations after that. So if anyone's got any stories out there,
contact Steve at the museum. Now, a couple of years ago, I did the most wonderful course on the weekend with Andrew McDonald, who has also been a guest on Big Little Small Talk. He had us at his studio, and it was a rustic furniture course. Now, you do lots of courses here. Tell me about them. You've got the rustic furniture.
Yeah. Look, one of the things that underpins the museum here is that outside of being able to physically see some old stuff, wouldn't it be good if we could maintain and build and preserve that with a set of skills that were used hundreds of years ago that we need to ensure will be used hundreds of years in the future? So Andy McDonald is one of those people that guides us. Terry Drennan, our blacksmith, Kerry Weir, our wheelwrighter. These guys, and I think there's only 6 wheelwrights left in the Southern Hemisphere. 6. And we're lucky enough to have one. So the more courses we can do with Kerry, the better, and how more insulation we can provide that preservation of craft. So we run upwards around 40 workshops every year around silversmithing, lead lighting, the different projects in the blacksmith where you make your own blacksmith tools and so forth. We're now getting a bit more engaged with TAFE because there's an opportunity to, if you like, recognise some of that work. So it becomes an opportunity to turn a hobby into a bit of a business opportunity, still preserving that craft. That then morphed itself into a weekend expose called the Lost Trades Fair. And in our first iteration of that, we had just short of 18,000 people over 2 days through the museum. I don't know if you were here, Megan. It was great, but gee, we wouldn't want to do that again, you know, and so we learnt a lot because it's all about experience and comfort. And but it really demonstrated there is a real desire out there to look at heritage, preservation, and particularly the craft and trades at risk. Bookbinding, chair building, all the things we take for granted, and kids wouldn't understand how they've done, so they get to go firsthand and meet these people, and if they like it, ultimately come back and do a course with them.
Brilliant. Now, Steve, if there's people out there listening who want to get involved with the museum, do you have a group of volunteers or?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's community again, but also this learning. One of the key principles of a museum is that people should walk away learning something. Hopefully we're learning something today, Megan. But,
definitely.
Look, learning starts as a child, as you've seen with the Have Another Look Captain Cook. Every week we do 2 to 3 iterations of little cobbers where Pop, Mum, Dad, Nan, Pop bring their young children in, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, to understand some nature of a book, a story, and then do a craft. So that learning starts at 3 years old in the museum, and you become a visitor and a lifelong member for us, hopefully for your life. But what happens when you get to the point where you're forced into some type of facility or aged care? So how can we make the museum relevant to that person still? For our volunteer network, of which we've got 68 amazing people, we actually take every week story, subsequent to the pandemic, because we're still coming back from that and we haven't got over that bridge yet, and particularly the 3rd peak now. But pre-pandemic, we were visiting 6 or 7 facilities a week with our volunteers, and they sit and talk about objects, they talk about past experiences with the residents. So we fulfil that lifelong learning commitment from 3-year-old to 90-year-old. And that's what I said, that's what I wear with pride when you talk about what does a museum do and how does it relate to its community.
Yeah, look, as you're saying that, I think I have heard about that program, so you might take a reminiscence.
That's
okay.
It.
Look, we don't even have time to talk. You touched on little cobbers. We don't have any time to talk about Hooray for Hornby. That'll be something that people will have to come and have a look at for themselves. Because I want to get on to my questions that I like to ask at the end of my sessions. Now, Steve, your first question is, what's the best gift you've ever got?
That's simple. That would be my lifelong best friend, Murphy Brown. He's a brown Labrador who unfortunately passed a couple of years ago. But to this day, I look at his picture every morning. I've still got his remains and ashes that I keep very close to me. And he was a gift from my girls. He was a $250 Labrador from a pet shop in some supermarket. So we didn't buy quality, but my God, we got the best friend that a man could ever ask for.
What a lovely thing to say. Murphy Brown, yeah.
A brown Labrador.
Brown, that's right. Okay, what conference, real or imaginary, would you absolutely hate to miss?
We've touched on environment and community, and obviously that's pretty strong in my personal agenda. If there was an imaginary conference, call it the 2040 Climate Leadership Conference, that would be something I would aspire to work with. I've been lucky enough to sit on the edges of conference in Australia around climate and business and pushing the benefits of biosphere-like behaviour. But I would like to think that we as a humanity are learning from how we have to look after ourselves and how we have to look after our planet. And if we do that, the planet will look after us. So I'm often amazed when I hear we're sending things to Mars so we can terraform Mars at great billions of dollars, thinking, well, why don't we just fix what we know we can fix pretty quickly and then take that on? But yeah, so it would be a conference about and then changing government, if you like, because we have democracy and totalitarianism. I'd like to think there'd be a thing called meritocracy, where our government and leaders, and I'll put you in this bunch, Megan, we got the best of the best coming together. And I think rather than have the divisive, you have the best of the best working for common cause, one vision, one voice. And a meritocracy might be something, we evolve in the future.
That's a big ask, isn't
it's
it?
a very,
yeah. What would happen to the party politics, I wonder?
Gonski.
Well, I'm sure the climate conference would have to be, you must be sort of heartened by us inching closer to getting a target on emissions.
Isn't
must
it?
be heartened by that.
It's heartwarming. Look, I've got to say the change of government, I'm not one political persuasion or the other, just for the record, but it's been really pleasing to see the proactive approach to just talking, getting re-engaged on all levels of discussion. Obviously there's a fiscal element to everything, we all understand that, but the fact that we're getting back engaged, we're talking about opportunities to transition into a new form of lifestyle and energy and power. We're not far off putting electric vehicle charge points at the museum right now. The TAFE are already building and designing courses, so mechanical engineers or car engineers will be a thing of the past. Carburetors, alternate, no, it's all going to be EV. So they're gearing up for that, as we have to. So our windmills in the precinct used to bring water to the surface for agricultural benefit. The windmills of the future, of course, bring power to power our lifestyle. So they're the type of stories that we've got to understand and start sharing.
While maintaining those skills of how to restore or build are they called wagon wheels, or are they
wagon wheels? Yes.
Wagon wheels,
yeah, for sure. And if anyone takes the chance to visit at the moment, Andy, who you mentioned just now, was given a challenge. The Department of Main Roads found this very, very skeletal, rusty remains of a wagon up in the Longreach, with the Longreach of water at Longreach, the Thompson River. And there was a challenge, could you rebuild it? And if people do get the chance over the next couple of weeks, come in before Carnival and you'll see what he's done with a basic restoration. It's amazing.
Okay, I will look forward to seeing that. I'd got to ask you the question, what's your favourite thing about living in Toowoomba?
My favourite thing about living in Toowoomba would be, as I said, I've been here 7 years. I've been lucky enough to live in some of the most vibrant cosmopolitan cities around the world, Vienna, Melbourne, and a lot of others. Do you know what I've witnessed is a coming of age of our city, our community. I get a lot of visitors and they say, well, what are we going to do? Now, coming from Albury, Wodonga for a while, they used to refer to themselves as the hole in the donut. You'd come to Albury, Wodonga, but all the tourism was at Rutherglen and Beechworth, and there was nothing to do in the city. And a lot of people said, could it be like that? And I said, well, it's not. It's actually transforming itself. Our food culture, our restaurant sector, the commitment in Russell Street to heritage and the revitalisation of that. I dare say the goods shed and its application to support events and functions, it's all, we're not getting it 100% correct, but no one ever does. But we're certainly on the path to doing that. And you've just got to walk around to any of our cafes for breakfast or dinner later that night. It's safe, and there's always a helping hand for whether you're elderly or the young, and I think that's really good. I'm really, really impressed with it.
You've said community a few times today. You think it's that sense of community, Steve. That's lovely to hear. I ask everyone this same question. What's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Oh, gee, there's too many to...
Are you a dancing man, Steve?
Well, you'd know the Macarena, wouldn't you? Well, could it be Nutbush City Limit? Could it be Achy Breaky Heart? But the answer is no to each of those. The answer would be Sweet Caroline.
Oh, one of my favourites, Neil Diamond.
Diamond too. But do you know the story behind the song?
No, tell me the story.
It was written for Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of John F. Kennedy.
Who is now here as a ambassador.
Absolutely, and that's really serendipitous that we're saying this. So, it was written for her, and then he got to sing it back at her 50th birthday. But in every story there's a but. In 2014, he rescinded that version of the birth and origin of the song to say it was really a reflection and homage to his wife, Wendy. But he couldn't use the name Wendy. He needed a name with 3 syllables. Now, I'm not sure where truth lies in that now, but...
Well, that sounds like a rabbit hole I'm going to have to go down, because I love the sound of that for a story. Brilliant. I heard her being interviewed the other day, and she chipped one of the journalists. He'd only been interviewed her for a minute, and she said, "Did you just talk over a woman then?" And so she'd only been here for 5 minutes, and she was making her mark.
Pretty impressive.
Okay, last question. Who's your favourite royal?
Oh, that's easy. I'm not really a royalist per se, but again, looking at what people do and what they do and achieve in their life, and it's not what we do, it's what we leave behind. There's a thing called the Invictus Games with a lot of returned servicemen who get caught in the flotsam and jetsam of life. Some do it well, some not so well. We get Mates for Mates as a group for here in the museum every week, and we really make sure they've got a safe space to talk and do their stuff, and they're actually going to start doing some work and cleaning up our courtyard, believe it or not. But the things like Prince Harry and his support for the Invictus probably gets me over the line with a vote for him.
Well done. It's always so telling to hear who their favourite royal is and for what reason. So that's a lovely answer. Steve, our time's gone by. Unfortunately, I reckon I could do another interview and have you for another 50 minutes because it's just been so much joy, particularly hearing about our world-class museum here, the Cobb+Co, and seeing all the things that you do and the enthusiasm that you do it with. We're just lucky to have you here in Toowoomba, and thanks for being my guest on Big Little Small Talk.
Oh, thank you, and it goes both ways. Of course, I'm lucky to be here myself.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.